On behalf of the chairman and DOG, our board of governors, my faculty, staff, and on my personal behalf, I welcome you all to this Golden Jubilee lecture series. Today we are having the 10th lecture. The title of the lecture is Social Science, Sociology, and Democracy. Professor Maitri Chaudhary from Center for the Study of Social System, JNU, will be delivering this lecture. In the series, this is the 10th lecture. We already have held 9 lectures. Renowned speakers like Professor Saibalkar from RBI chair, Professor at TSSS Kolkata inaugurated this series. Professor Seema Batla, JNU CSRD, she delivered the second lecture. Professor KJ Joseph from GIDS from Kerala, she delivered the third lecture. Professor Arup Mitra, who was with IEG earlier, now South Asian University, delivered the fourth lecture. We had Arjunan Subramanian from University of Glasgow in the fifth lecture, and then Professor Satish Chandra, economics strategist from Indonesia, delivered the sixth lecture. Achin Chakravarti, again from Calcutta, he delivered our seventh lecture. Professor Manish from Central University Gandhinagar delivered the eighth lecture, and last lecture was by Professor Sumitra Shilacharya, Social Science and Medicine from the JNU. He delivered ninth lecture. We have today the lecture by Professor Chaudhary, Maitri Chaudhary on social science, sociology, and democracy. We had a series of lectures related to mostly in the sphere of economics. We are a diversified social science institute, so we also had something on sociology, political science, related topics. The last lecture was on women health issues, community health issues by Professor Sumitra Acharya. Today we are having on sociology and democracy, discussing the wider branches of social science. We shall have another 2 to 3 lectures before we go to conclude our Golden Jubilee series. So, the purpose of this kind of lecture series, wider dissemination, and I think the question of democracy, how it impacts the question of the social sciences itself is a much bigger question. I think I was going through the abstract of today's lecture, and the kind of stuff it speaks, I think that is going to be really very motivating. Do we need social science in the center stage in our country? Are we having priority of social sciences in our today's discourse? I think this will be the basic theme of the lecture. Before I hand over the mic to my colleague here, Professor Ajit Pandey, who will be chairing, I'll just briefly introduce the chairman and the speakers along with discussion, and then we will start the formal delivery of the lecture. So first, I have the honor of introducing Professor Ajit Pandey, my colleague here as a visiting professor at GIDS Institute. He is former head Department of Sociology and former director Center for the Study of Social Exclusion and Inclusive Policy at BHU, Banaras Hindu University. He was also faculty of Social Science, Banaras Hindu University, Varanasi. He obtained his PhD Sociology from JNU, and I think he completed it during the I think Sitaram Yaturi's time, because I hear a lot of stories from him sitting in the director office. Yeah. He has served several other places, in Sina Institute, Patna University of Lucknow. I think his detailed resume is given in the already circulated. So I will not go into all those details, but he has been a source of inspiration for so many institutions, institution builder, and I am happy to have him today chairing this very important lecture. Welcome you, sir. Today's speaker, Professor Maitri Chaudhary. She has taught at Center for the Study of Social Systems, Jawaharlal Nehru University from 1990 to 2021, I think almost 30 years now. She is currently the president of Indian Sociological Society. She was the coordinator of the Center for Advanced Studies, JNU, the chairperson of the center and the director of the Human Studies program, and the coordinator of Global Studies program. She has written widely on feminism, media, academia, and pedagogy. Her key publications are snapped here. I will just keep it. She has taught widely both within India and abroad. She was the first professor, India chair, McGill University, visiting professor at Albert Ludwig University, Germany, and visiting fellow at Harvard University and the University of Massachusetts. She has been an active member of many academic bodies and many national and international editorial boards. She is one of the 3 founder members of the blog on sociology and accessible but informed discussions. She is widely available on the YouTube as well. I have myself seen some of those. Welcome, madam. Your lecture is really bringing a lot of knowledge for all of us who have interest in social sciences. And my privilege introducing Dr. Kiranmai Bushi, who is currently professor in the Faculty of Sociology, School of Social Science, Indira Gandhi National Open University, New Delhi. As a faculty member in the distance and open learning system, she comes from a different system. She has designed, edited, and coordinated programs and courses. There's a different kind of experience altogether. She is working extensively in various institutions and academic organizations, drawing on their expertise. She was also involved in initiatives in extension education and community development. As part of these initiatives, she developed innovative technology, innovative teaching, learning, and evaluate techniques and methods. Apart from this involvement with IGNO, she has had a brief stint of teaching experience in Columbia College, Chicago, and Ambedkar University, Delhi, and C. Pescari, I can't pronounce it properly, Venice, Italy, as a visiting faculty. She has published several articles and research papers in leading national and international journals. Her recent publication is Palm to Fingers, Culture and Politics of Food in Contemporary India, published by Cambridge University Press. She has done her PhD from JNU. Again, her research interests lie in the area of diaspora studies, migration, and nationalism, food studies, and popular culture. So we have the JNU alumni is there. I myself done PhD from CSRD Center. So we have the chair also who is from JNU. So we are going to have a big JNU show today. So I now welcome the chair of today's show, Professor Ajit Pandey. Thank you. Ajit ji will take over. Madam, we will have 35 to 40 minutes lecture. You can take 40 minutes, 50 minutes, and then would be some 15, 20 minutes for the discussion, and then open discussion for at least half an hour, more if time permits. And the last rituals by Dr. Prashant, the formal vote of thanks. Anyway, you share both of you. So over to Professor Pandey.
Thank you very much. And instead of wasting time, I directly invite Chaudhary. kindly enlighten us by your ideas and thoughts on the topic that you have chosen to speak on. Please, we invite you. Mr. Matthew, please. Can you hear me?
Sir, you are not very audible.
Not very clear.
Not very clear. And I
I'm sorry. I said that I invite you on behalf of the Institute to kindly enlighten us by your ideas on the topic that you have chosen to speak on. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. So should I begin? Thank you so much. Thank you so much. At the outset, I would like to express my sincere thanks to the Director, GIDS Institute of Development Studies, Professor Pramod Kumar, Lucknow, for inviting me to speak on the Institute's Gold Jubilee Lecture Series. Thank you to all the faculty of the Institute. A special thank you, Dr. Prashant. It is a privilege and honor to speak today. But what makes me very happy is the chair today, as mentioned already. Professor Adit Pandey is a class friend. Many of you are much younger, and you'd probably be a little surprised that we have known each other for 47 years, almost close to half a century, And Professor Kiran Rishi, the discussant of the day, happens to be my student and now, of course, a friend. Thank you very much for this privilege. I speak today on social sciences, sociology, and democracy. This is not a novel or a very unique theme. It is, in fact, central to the history of social sciences, and I would like to argue epistemologically at the very core of sociology. Sociologists such as Professor Dipankar Gupta have argued that social science and democracy have an elective affinity. The notion of elective affinity, usually associated with Max Weber, has a long history, which is much older than Weber's writings. Weber did not explicitly define what he meant by elective affinity, but if we go back to Dipankar Gupta, he would suggest it is a process through which two cultural forms, religious, intellectual, political, economic, enter into a relationship of reciprocal attraction and influence, mutual selection, active convergence, and mutual reinforcement. It is from this premise of mutual reinforcement that I would like to start with. One part of this relationship, and the part that has often been looked at, is that only in democratic societies do social sciences flourish. If you look globally, whether it is in democratic capitalist societies in the global north, you will find that you've had great flourishing of social sciences. If you look at a country like India, which is relatively as a colonized country for 200 years, came into its own independent sovereignty in 1947, has, to my mind, produced a phenomenal body of social science scholarship, whether in history, economics, political science, sociology, social anthropology. And part of the reason for this has been the specific conditions within which social sciences are conducively produced. So institutions such as the institution that I speak on today were deliberately constructed or constituted. The Indian state took upon itself this particular role, whether through the ICSSR or whether through the other kind of bodies, to set up institutions which would flourish it. Since, the director had already mentioned the university of which we are all very proud members, it was created, again, particularly for the flourishing of a certain kind of social science knowledge, one for development and one for free thinking and democratic exchange of ideas, so that you have the diversity and inequalities which exist in society find a conducive space to express itself. So this has been one kind of focus when we talk about social science, sociology, and democracy. The argument being that only in a democratic society do you have a flourishing of social sciences. People have looked at, say, the experience of the Soviet Union. Many of you would be familiar with the kind of literature the kind of writings when we talk about Tolstoy, or when we talk about Gorky, when we talk about very rich Russian literature, was usually prior to the point when you had the state taking over some of the key social institutions of society. Likewise, you would have a very rich cultural production of knowledge in societies which were in the midst of the anti-colonial movement. We've had rich literature, rich writings in our own country during precisely the colonial period. You had social reform movement, you had writings by social reformers, political activists, nationalist writing. Look at any of the writings of our nationalist leaders, whether it is Mahatma Gandhi, whether it is Dr. Ambedkar, whether it is the first prime minister of the country, whether it is spiritual leaders like Vivekananda, whether it was somebody like Aurobindo, whose writings on culture in India is a text that we actually taught in JNU. So whether it was Veerasalingam in the South, whether it was Ram Mohan Rai writing about liberalism, whether it was Ranade talking about Bacon, we've had a very, very fertile development of writing through the 19th century and early 20th century. Social sciences, therefore, usually emerge very, very productively in a state of crisis. And post-crisis, it needs a democratic society for it to nurture established institutions where this can be done. Interestingly, this is a lesson that we begin in all sociology textbooks. Whenever we teach, whether it is in school textbooks, college textbook, guidebooks, UPSC syllabus, we begin with a topic called the emergence and growth of sociology. And we have three kinds of indicators when we talk about the growth and emergence of sociology: Enlightenment, science; the culture of science, age of reason; French Revolution, that is democracy; and industrial capitalism. Now, in the contemporary context of both a question of unfettered market economy neoliberalism and the growth of certain kinds of majoritarianism, there can be two criticisms to this kind of rendition of the emergence and growth of sociology. One is that they are Western developments. What do we do with these? Hamare saath kya taluk hai that this has happened in the West? What do you do with it? Recently, a colleague mentioned that these were writings which are ghisa pita, and we have to do something new. Now, I would like to argue that these historical past actually do have an impact on the present. They do have bearings, they may have their limits, but they have bearings for the present, both historically and geographically. Let me address what do I mean historically and what do I mean geographically. First point, which has been addressed by many other scholars in our country, that the West before modernity was not very different from us. When we say, look, our culture is unique in the sense we have a lot of emphasis on family, kinship, religion, spiritual practices, deference to tradition, deference to our questions of our past. The world was not so different in a pre-modern West. So it is not that our modernity is unique or their modernity is unique, or the West was always modern. The West was also always not modern. The West was a place where they actually killed people for scientific interventions which challenged the learnings of the church. It was a place where they would kill women who practiced culturally deviant forms or challenged patriarchal norms for witch burning. So the West was not so different from us. If you read novels of 19th century, if you read something like Jane Austen, we know that arranged marriages also took place in the West. We also know that in the West, they had as many uncles and aunts, tayadis and chatadis and aunts as we had. So the West was not unique in its pre-modern sense. The pre-modern was very similar in a certain sense between the global North and global South. So that's the first point. The second point is that when we often say that, look, all that Enlightenment, French Revolution, capitalism, purani baat hai, how does it affect us? But when we talk about it in that fashion, there is a feeling that there was something unique out there. So when they became capitalist, or when they moved into industrial capitalism, we were behind them. And we actually are people who joined the class late. We were laggards and we joined the race late. There is a fundamental epistemological mistake over here, because when there was colonial modernity in the West, when there was industrial capitalism in the West, we were colonized. We were very much part of modern colonial industrial practices. We were not something that was standing alone. We were part of it. We were intrinsic to it. If French Revolution was unique and did not impact us, that is not true. Because as all of you who are familiar with the history of the freedom movement in our country, or the writings of, feminist writings in our country, or anti-caste writings in our country, we know that they were familiar with democratic ideas. They were familiar with the idea of reason and rationality. They were also familiar with the idea that knowledge should be universally shared, that knowledge is not supposed to be controlled by any one section. So modern knowledge is very, very intrinsically connected with the democratic process. French Revolution, as France may be very distant mode, but how many of us would be familiar, how many of the French Revolution would be referred to in our own novels, in our own poetry, not just now, but maybe 100 years ago. It's very interesting that people like Ranade would talk about Bacon when they were writing in Marathi, talking about widow remarriage. So there is a long history of what we could call, in retrospect, global knowledge practices. Though there are hierarchies there, but it was very much there. Colonial modernity and us, therefore, are linked. The second point that we need to look back is that there was a trend always present. This goes back to my point that very often people will say, why are we teaching certain kinds of things in the fashion that we are doing? So the critique of Westernness of developments. The second, the idea that social science, to be relevant, has to be immediately applicable. An idea that critique is unproductive or of no value to the building up of a society or state. For very often when people will say that, look, you are so critical, you are so negative, इस knowledge से हमें क्या फायदा होगा, कुछ positive करना चाहिए. Now, unless you have an understanding of how the economy functions, how culture functions, how society functions, how will you be able, even if you wish to, provide policy recommendations? If you do not know what is happening to the agrarian society or rural India, how are you able to suggest measures, even if you are to address those problems? So here comes the critical question: what is our relationship as sociologists, as social scientists, to the larger society? How do we contribute? Do we contribute by producing knowledge in modules? Jaise aajkal you have instant food, instant Maggi. Do we have instant knowledge which we can provide in order for it to be of any kind of value or utility to society? I would argue, and I would argue quite strongly, no, we can't. Our relationship to society is what I would say mediated. The knowledge that we produce is useful, but it is not useful in the way Maggi noodle can be boiled. It is useful as what Bottomer would call public enlightenment. He made a distinction between the role of sociology as producing social engineers and as public enlightenment. So each of us, whether it is my friend Adit, when you teach in class, are we working as sociological engineers, or are we talking in terms of public enlightenment? The people who we teach in classroom, do they grow up to be first-rate journalists, public policy makers, teachers, lecturers, social reformers, activists, writers, thinkers? Is that our role? Or is our role to produce fixed modules of knowledge which could be applied according to the tenets of whoever may be in power in the state here? I seek to develop the broad argument I have placed before you, but I would like to seek to develop it over 3 parts. Part 1 examines the reasons for the idea, the widely prevalent idea that social sciences are of no use, and within social sciences, sociology has no use at all. Like economics does have certain kinds of use, but sociology, what use is it? I would like to spend a little bit of time on that. part 2, I would like to focus on the specificity of social science and sociology and argue that the tendency to measure the value of social sciences or sociology on the yardsticks laid by natural science is faulty and needs serious interrogation. And part 3, to revisit some of the debates about the purposes of higher education and social science in a modern democratic society, or to put it in some other way, the use of social science in this task. Now, if we look at the whole debate in public discourse about the relevance of sociology, social science, and democracy, you will find two contending ideas which are in circulation. One, which I've already referred to, that they're really of no use, unlikely to be worth much in the employment market, and also seen as an easy and last option. This view is strongest in the case of sociologists. Paradoxically, we also have a view very, very strong in an earlier pre-neoliberal era that educational systems are very important, social science and humanities have a very important role to play in constructive and critical citizenship, a vibrant and informed public sphere, without which the objective for striving towards a peaceful, democratic, and just society would fail. One can claim, while the former, the view, which is that social science ka koi fayda nahi hai, is a more popular discourse, and the latter, that it is very, very important for critical citizenship, is more influential but restricted to elite quarters. So what has happened today in the contemporary times, the popular discourse has taken over what was the more influential discourse, and the critique is that that is an elite view. And the more popular view is, iska koi fayda nahi hai. And in order for it to be useful, we have to, in a certain sense, reformulate what social science means. Here, I want to deviate a little bit and ask, I find, Ernest Gellner, who talks about modernity, nationalism, and what he calls about cognitive centralization, very important for the discussion that we are having today. He made a distinction between garden culture and natural culture. Many of us who are familiar, the monsoons have hit Delhi, is that when it rains in the villages, when it rains in the wild, then the rain is very beautiful in a certain sense because you do not have the kind of mess which monsoons can generate in the urban sphere. You will have flooding, you will have drains blocked. In many of the houses, including, I think, the discussants today, you have flooding. Now, the garden culture, Gellner's argument was, it's a traditional culture where you don't have the state necessarily intervening to say what kind of culture you should have or what kind of tradition. So we would have different kind of folk, different kind of customs, different kinds of gods and goddesses, religious worships, anything, because it would be within the community and it would be tended by the community. Whereas in a modern society, you would have what would be called a kind of garden culture. Sorry, I made made a mistake. The garden culture is the kind of manicured gardens, which we have in fancy houses where the Mali will come, cut the hedges, trim the trees, put it in a certain order. And if he stops doing it, if the Mali does not come and trim the trees or trim the hedges, it will go completely wild. It will not look very nice. It will look untended. It will look as something which is ugly. Whereas in nature, if you go to a forest, there is no Mali there, but the nature has a certain kind of balance, which has an equilibrium of its own. But once in a modernity, you start having a garden culture and the state has a particular role in tending it, you can't stop. You can't suddenly say, look, let it go on in its own way, because it has already been, if I wish to use the slightly complex term, contaminated in some way. Gellner also argues that, look, along with this, education in a modern society or social sciences in a modern society is linked to the question of cognitive centralization. Meaning you can't plan unless you have data at your hand. Economists would be much more sensitive and aware about this. But even with sociologists, we have debates on the caste census, we have debates on fertility of women, we have questions of mortality, morbidity. We had the whole question of during the COVID, we need data. We need a certain kind of cognitive centralization. That is necessary in a modern society, both for industrial capitalism, large-scale production, and for the ability to work in a particular fashion. We can't go back. We can't today decide, like while cognitive centralization we'll go back to a natural culture. This larger framework is important for us to understand the relationship between sociology, social science, and democracy. So on one hand, when we say it has a contribution to sociology to democracy, it's not a one-to-one relationship that sociology will necessarily produce democratic culture. It will produce democratic culture only if we move towards production of public enlightenment as well as social engineers. Not only social engineers and not only public enlightenment. Both are necessary. Interestingly, in our country, I think our early leaders, political leaders, policymakers were aware about this. They were aware about this. So if you look at any of the IIMs or IITs, and all of you are familiar of how proud we are about the IITs and IIMs, they all have a department of social science and humanities. One of my, a senior student who is now a dean at the IIM, he wrote a piece for one of my edited books on the first governing council, the chairperson's speeches during the governing council meetings of the IIMs. And it is incredible how rich they were, because they were basically talking that even management in an ex-colonized society would not be possible without a serious understanding of the social sciences on how a society is particularly structured. As in my introduction, the reference was made to having now becoming the president of the International Sociological, the Indian Sociological Society, I started getting interested to find what context did societies or institutions like this begin not only at the state level. I've already mentioned the Indian state, ICSSR, the other Indian institutions. But globally, post-World War II, there was the realization that we need to intervene for peace and democracy. As you would know, the world had 2 world wars. People were devastated, lives were destroyed, atom bombs were thrown. And there was a certain kind of consensus which developed post-World War II that we need peace for development and we need knowledge. The UNESCO, in fact, promoted institutions like the International Sociological Association, the ISA. And interestingly, the ISS is also linked to the ISA. If I look at my own center where I was trained, Center for the Study of Social System, and the founding members like Professor Yogendra Singh, he writes in many of the UNESCO-sponsored journals about the role of social sciences, about the role of sociology. They saw themselves as global actors in bringing about a better society. We have a history behind, and we need to look back at some of the history. Recent years, however, has seen a dramatic shift. And perhaps this shift, the idea that, look, social sciences have to have instant solution, instant recommendation. So even our young students, when they're doing an exam, after writing 4 paragraphs, they want to have a section on recommendation. Term papers, even if they have studied only 10 respondents, they want a section on recommendation, because the feeling is that if you bring in a section on recommendation, you become relevant. It's important to negate strongly that is not the idea of relevance. The idea of relevance, are we producing good knowledge? If there is good knowledge, that good knowledge will spread everywhere, whether it's policy making, developmental work, or whether it is a greater, vibrant, informed media. This perhaps is an opportune time to argue that the teaching of sociology is justified insofar as a liberal education is assumed to have more than etymological connection with intellectual liberation, and therefore for the conditions suitable for freedom and democracy to flourish. So the point is not just that democracy leads to the flourishing of social sciences, but I argue strongly that sociology has an etymological connection because it is arguing for intellectual liberation. It is arguing to say, look, we take no knowledge for taken for granted. Whatever statement you make, we want to say why. We want to ask how. You want to say what. And whenever you have the question of what, how, why, then you're talking about the premises of that knowledge. You're talking about the philosophical foundations of that knowledge. It becomes important to do that. However, the version of social sciences, which is the dominant version, has very little relationship with this kind of more philosophical, if I may say, a philosophically grounded idea of social sciences and as sociology. I begin on a biographical note. My biographical note is that as a young student, I became interested in relevance of social sciences from some of my personal experience. As a young middle-class woman, I did English literature, and nobody had any objection. If my brother did English literature, they would have. Instead, he did first sciences and then economics. In my case, it was all right because they expected that she'll get married. Doesn't really matter what she does. So when I took sociology, even then it seemed quite natural. It was not something very serious. Time pass wali baat hai. And so this, my gender explained it. In other words, there are some self-evident and taken for granted ideas about academic disciplines which also circulate in society. Sociology is one of those disciplines which takes even the informal, even the unstated, even let us say the illegitimate as certain kinds of knowledge forms. Peter Berger, in his invitation to sociology, therefore says, look, if sociology is interested not only in the way lawyers or law looks at crime, they also want to see how criminals look at crime. So it changes the very modus of how we do sociology. Social sciences is thus widely, because of the manner in which it is taught, you memorize, you have to learn by rote, you reproduce. Isme samajhne ka kya baat hai? You have to basically do rote learning. So it is not seen as something very worthwhile. Now, these ideas I would not have begun with if they were stray or unusual. The problem is that this is widespread even within policymakers, even within very informed state. My argument is that very often when people critique social sciences or critique sociology, they fail to make the distinction between the dominant way in which it is practiced and also the core of social sciences, which is different. They also tend to forget that social science and natural sciences have some similarity, but also some very, very important differences. And finally, that we have to revisit some of the debates. I'm going to slowly come very quickly to the tail end of my presentation. And one of the first points about misrecognition of social science. Misrecognition in two senses. A lot of people feel sociology mein kya karna? You study caste, family, kinship, marriage. Ye to sabko hi pata hai, what do you need? So there's an assumption that common sense knowledge is equivalent to sociological knowledge. This is a misrecognition because sociology is actually, like the natural sciences, talking about something which you cannot see. You can see family in its particular form of expression, but you can't see lines of kinship or lines of descent by physically looking at any kind of empirical form. This is one misrecognition. The other misrecognition is that sociology is just like natural science, unity of scientific method, or the other end, that sociology is nothing like natural sciences. I come in a little bit in between. Between that, there is a common ground between natural science and social science is that we both look beyond the facade, beyond what is empirically visible. We question about observation, we look at categories, we use concepts. It's very different from common sense knowledge, which is often what is knowledge acquired. When we grow up in our families, we learn language, we learn rituals, we know how to talk to people, we know how to behave, we know how to dress. That is almost organic. You don't need any systematic learning. We also learn about family, good girl, bad boy, good marriage, bad marriage. We learn about which caste is what. We learn about all kinds of things, very often prejudiced, not fully wrong, but partial. In social sciences, we challenge that self-evident knowledge. We start asking, why is this knowledge formed in this fashion? What is it which is common to all families, irrespective of regions or global locations, castes or communities, and what is it which is different? In other words, we ask theoretical questions. We move beyond. That is common between natural science and social science. What is not common? What is not common is our relationship to our object of inquiry, society, is very, very close. We are a product of our society. I have a gender, I have a class, I belong to a religious community, I'm a mother, I'm married, I have children. All these identities are part and parcel of me as an observer to the society. So certain kinds of things, I am struck by my ideological location, or even what I would say my identity location. This is very different from the natural sciences. However, the validation in our case, therefore, is different. The validation is social sciences is somewhat different, but not completely separate. It is valid insofar that we have to have a method, we have to have a theory, we have to have a familiarity with epistemological and ontological question. What is this reality? What is my relationship to this reality? Why have I chosen this sample and not that sample? Why have I asked this research question and not that research question? Why have I chosen this technique? And unless I can answer that, I will be doing a mechanical counting number, which is not the same as social sciences. The teaching of social science, unfortunately, today do not engage with classical theories. We need to do that. We need to get rid of the idea that theory is necessarily high words, jargon, complicated terms. Theory, I often say, is our magnifying glass. It is our kind of laboratory instrument through which we can see. It is our way of seeing theory and method, because it gives us certain kind of concepts which help us to see. Concepts are a lens to society. Concepts are not just about operational measures. So it is therefore important to realize that when I talk about sociology and democracy, social science and democracy, I am not just talking about the conditions within which social sciences flourish. I'm also saying that unless we have social sciences, critical social sciences, we cannot have a democratic and just society. Unless we as academics formulate our research questions and are not only applying research questions handed down to us by developmental organizations, corporate sectors, or state or international institutions, we will be losing the most productive aspect of our social sciences. In times when the decoloniality has become a buzzword, it is important for our young scholars to go back to some of the most profound debates within sociology, which talks about concepts, categories, and whether we have to engage critically with Western categories without throwing out the bathwater with the bath, making a distinction between why Western social sciences is relevant and at the same time critiquing it. And when we use the word critique, remember, critique doesn't mean negative, or critique doesn't mean finding out trouble or criticism. Critique means the ability to see beyond the empirical, beyond the facade, beyond what is there before us. Like every science, sociology accepts the principle of determinism, understood as a form of the principle of sufficient reason. Nothing is without a specific social reason. Further, the social sciences share with natural science a respect for logical clarity in the formulation of theories and for disciplined empirical investigation. If we do not practice good social sciences, we are not going to be useful for anyone. I would end with Peter Berger, whom I greatly admire. In the invitation to sociology, he makes this in half jocular fashion that, look, when a spy works for a totalitarian state, the spy wants to please his or her masters. So he tries to sort of, modulate or sort of shift the kind of data which will make the master happy, or the lady in power happy, or the master in power happy. Now, the argument Peter Berger says that kind of partial or partisan data collected with the spy is not useful for the ruler, not useful for society, is not useful even for the enemy. So in order for good data to emerge in society, to figure out what is happening in our society, to hear the voices of people, to hear how different people look at phenomena differently, as well as hard data, both perception as well as hard data is necessary. Our first quest is therefore to discover the hidden, not that which is apparently visible to all. I will end over here, hoping that you would be responding with certain kinds of questions, arguing, therefore, not just that democratic societies are necessary for social sciences, but social sciences are necessary for a just, good, and democratic society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Maitri. That's beautiful communications from you. You have provided a lot of conceptual materials for theorizing in social sciences.
So, it's not very audible. Could you speak up, sir, a little bit?
No problem. I don't know. Maybe in my voice. Yeah, no problem.
I was speaking. I don't know. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, yes. Yours is clearer. Yes.
Hear me now. I was holding in very high esteem after having heard your so insightful ideas in sociology and social sciences courses.
Are you able to hear?
Yes.
Yes, yes, yes.
I'll be back to you soon when I'll come for my presidential address. Prior to that, I invite Professor Kiranmai for discussing your lecture. Please.
Thank you very much. At the outset, let me thank Professor Pramod for inviting me to the V.V. Giri Institute for organizing these series of lectures. I think the fact that it's in a hybrid mode, I hope this will definitely benefit a whole range of audiences who have gathered here. And it's, of course, my special privilege to be a discussant for Professor Maitreyi Chowdhury, who's been my mentor, guide, and I would say a philosopher and friend. Philosopher, definitely, because what I really like about this particular lecture, as well as her general outlook, not just in life, but with the discipline of sociology, is the wide canvas that she encompasses and how she is able to relate a range of epistemological as well as social issues and connect them together. And I feel very privileged to be a discussant. So let me get down to a certain observations that I draw from this talk. And as rightfully, told by Professor Maitreyi Chowdhury, sociology is definitely a child of crisis, something that a discipline born of crisis. And that is what is the amazing thing about it. And she gave a very interesting narrative on how the intellectual histories and the context in which sociology has emerged continues to inform us. And I would just like to add to these crises that she mentioned. And I was just wondering that do we need to add a list of additional crises that we are now compelled to sort of encounter, and one of which very succinctly I'll put it as the post-truth world. How do we deal with a shifting ground where a veracity, the very idea of veracity is doubtful? I mean, we are not even going as far as Habermas's idea of validity contestation, where a proper dialogue can be achieved. Now, validity contestation can happen when you have a fixed sense of validity, or what he calls truth or rightfulness or sincerity. So what is the nature of dialogue, a dialogical public sphere that we can hope to have? So that is one of the things that bothers me in this post-truth world. I'm obviously signaling some of the things that I sense. The second one, which I thought about, was what I call the epistemological pluralism, which is basically the result of, we did have Enlightenment, modernity, French Revolution, so on and so forth, which are very universal in nature. It's a sort of the Enlightenment project, which included all of the humanity. It was part of a rational, enlightened self that we were all part of the journey. But the post-structuralist turn, or the language turn, has also questioned these linear narratives, which brings us to another problem, which is the kind of hermeneutically sealed sense of epistemological narratives that seems to have emerged. I can give a plethora of examples, whether it's identity politics in real, as well as how they translate themselves into how identities are represented, who writes about them, who has the authority to write about them. So there is this hermeneutic sealing, if I may so, of a sort of identities that are increasingly proliferating. The queer proliferation of identities is one example. I often get theses, and I struggle with even the pronouns. Forget about how I have to understand the subjectivities that the scholar is trying to understand and project. So that is the other turn, the epistemological pluralism, or the language turn, but which also then makes us look at the scope and location of sociology itself. Because now you have cultural studies, we have a range of studies, which also are willy-nilly grappling with similar questions. So the very defined way that we have inherited how sociology needs to be looked at is something that we need to now take a sort of an imaginative leap out of. And the imaginative leap out can also be on other contexts as well, which is because we are now living in a world which is in a constant flux. Our sense of time and space, both are not what they used to be. So even as a sociologist or a young scholar who wants to go and do research out there, how do we really make causal connections in a world that is so wide-spanning, where influences can happen from any angle? And it's a methodological question as well, which then makes us rethink about how do we define the scope of sociology. So I think among the very many crises, that's one more thing I just very quickly wanted to flag off. I think these things will also make us rethink what is the central project of sociology. Very interestingly, in the 70s, late 60s onwards, until I think almost about 80s, in Americas, sociology was very popular. And part of it is to do with how the critical school, that's the Frankfurt School, the scholars who went to Berkeley and so on and so forth, inspired a whole range of students. And suddenly there was massive enrollment in sociological or sociology discipline. I think sociology has been on the wane since 90s because some of the radicalness has lost its charm. Since 80s, I think radicalism has become an old-fashioned word, so much so. And in its place, we have a very instrumentalist way of thinking that has come to dominate all sciences, including social sciences, and particularly social sciences. I think economics has resurrected itself, and Joseph Stiglitz says economics has become the biggest cheerleader of capitalism, and maybe sociology shouldn't be doing that, but what should it be doing? should it reimagine or not even, it doesn't really take much imagination, even if we keep some very simple major issues in mind. The major issues which concern us all somehow seem to have receded to the background. And those issues are, inequality, marginality, continuing oppression, whatever it could be in varieties of ways. And how then do we pick up these major issues, which to my mind are still universal? How do we then take up these major issues and still contextualize them, still give them the kind of subjectivities that the linguistic or the discourse analysis would wish for? So these are some of the concerns that I have. And of course, sometimes I also think maybe we can be subversive and come up with a language that seems, well, this is, maybe off records, I'm just saying it, seems subversive enough to include a language that seems potentially useful, but actually it is deeply honing on the one's critical faculties. And maybe we need to come up with a vocabulary of how to define usefulness. So I think with these words, I'll stop here. And thanks for this wonderful lecture, Maitri. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. And I'm sure the audience and various participants here would have a lot more to say and would want to participate. So I'll stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Now I open it for discussion, for questions. If you have questions, anybody has a question?
Anybody from the online first? Unmute and you can open your video. You have a question?
Chat box check kar lo.
Yes, Shilshika, please go ahead.
I'm Shilshika, faculty at GIDS. I've met you long back and I'm hearing you after a decade almost. I heard you last at CSSS when I had just completed my postdoctorate and you had come over there for a lecture. So I'm really delighted to see you and hear you once again. And I also thank you for echoing the deep concerns that often trouble me and my non-economist colleague at GIDS. The straight jacketing of social science in terms of what it should look like and what it should speak of is deeply troubling for us these days. You spoke about sociology, but I think political science is in an even more fragile state right now because, everybody, this overpowering of the commonsensical perspective or knowledge divide of any critical insight, is very, very problematic. And it's not just overpowering of the commonsensical or saying that, what you would tell us as a political scientist, we know of politics. It's not just that. It is also, in a way, transforming the normative framework of the discipline per se, without any dialogue, because they are sidelining the critical debates and things like that. So, it's not just commonsensical. It is also changing the normative framework. Now, my question is how to deal with it, how to expand this critical space, so that at least when it comes to changing the framework, the normative framework, we have a kind of a say, how to deal with it and yet remain relevant, in the accepted sense of on their yardsticks or on the prevalent yardstick.
Yes, you can. Yes, Maitri can answer back.
Okay. Thank you very much for this wonderful question that allows me to enter. What I think that in sociology or political science, perhaps maybe also, but we used to have more of it in sociology, the idea that what we see or observe or believe is sociology. And it's very interesting that if we go back, and this is something maybe as now a retired teacher, I keep reiterating, to go back to some of the classical writings. And somebody like Durkheim would be widely acceptable. In the Rules of Sociological Method says the problem in social sciences is that that human beings did not wait for social sciences to arrive to have ideas about family, marriage, kinship, religion, market, or efficiency, or goodness, or badness, or legitimacy. People already had. So that has been pervasive. Where the fundamental shift takes place is with modernity, when you question that these ideas, normative, dominant ideas, are not what ought to be. In the contemporary period, and that's what you're addressing to, we have a slightly different moment which has taken place, where I agree that the normative framework is changing, but I would argue that it is not separate from common sense. What is happening today is a certain blurring and a deliberate blurring between the social sciences and common senses. And this is in the context of the rise of global populism. Populism is a phenomenon globally, and populist leaders would always say whatever everybody says. Like my uncle says this, or my grandmother says this, and today you would have probably important political leaders or economic leaders say this. That difference has gone. They will say, what is so special about what you know? We know, hame dikhta hai. And this idea of empiricism, so they will say, I know this happened somewhere else, or I know that happened somewhere else. Like I remember I had not retired when there was a lot of controversy, unfortunate controversy in JNU, and I was right there. But people who are stay, maybe my relatives in the Northeast or maybe in Bengal, would call me up and say, this happened in your campus. I was right there, but their idea that this is so-and-so said it, or so-and-so said it. So the grounds of knowledge have shifted. And what has happened is it was always there. Even earlier it was there. But now the common sense has become the legitimate, has become the normative. So they will expect from me, so they will say, ask me, that आप तो JNU में पढ़ाए हैं, it's an elite institution है, ivory tower academics है, can you solve this problem? There are many problems I cannot solve, but that doesn't mean that the whole body of knowledge is irrelevant. Who defines the problem? That is the kind of question today's contemporary social science is not asking. So I do gender. All my people who are doing gender among my generation of students, many of their topics were how microcredit and empowerment of women. Then if you ask them, how do you define empowerment of women? They would have certain kind of indicators which would be given by a particular agency. So if I ask, can you redefine these attributes, they would say no. This has been happening over the decades. Today, what has happened, that the distinction has completely collapsed. Distinction has completely collapsed. And so what we say is no longer of any relevance. It's just a name. What I say is not important. How I have come to the conclusion, whether empirical or theoretical, is not important. What is important, what Kiran was saying, is who I am. That is, oh, she taught in that university, or she is from that kind of thing, that will be more important, who she is or who he is, rather than the grounds of knowledge that we are talking about. And you were asking me, Shilpi, what do we do today? I think today, and I increasingly accept such requests for such lectures, that we have to disseminate a more painful, slower, lesser attractive social sciences. Time lagta. But today we are in a difficult world, social media. I have a book review written by somebody referred to me, and I'll put it on social media. Like today somebody has reviewed a book in which I have been mentioned, is also put out. So the instantness, the speed of social media has crept into the practice of social sciences. So citation, all that. And I think it's important to look into those mechanisms. Good social science is neither instant nor very seductive. It can be very boring, but it is the boringness which is important. I agree with what you're saying completely, but the only difference I have in your framework is I feel the normative and the common sense have merged together. And there is power. Obviously, if the people in power say this is legitimate, it becomes very difficult for any of us to say that it is not.
Thank you.
Yes, please. Any other?
थैंक यू मैम। मैं डॉक्टर कविता बालियान, फैकल्टी गिरी इंस्टीट्यूट। सबसे पहले तो मैं सच में थैंक यू बोलूंगी डायरेक्टर सर का, प्रशांत का, आपको बुलाया। मैं कहूंगी कि पढ़ा है आपके बारे में, लेकिन पढ़ने से ज्यादा सुना बहुत था। और जब मैं पीएचडी कर रही थी, गिरी इंस्टीट्यूट में आई थी, तो प्रोफेसर एके सिंह थे, ही वाज द फर्स्ट कि मैं पीएचडी करना चाह रही थी कि वुमेन्स कंट्रीब्यूशन इन एग्रीकल्चर, जो प्रैक्टिकली था कि प्रैक्टिकल ये होता है कि वुमेन कुछ काम नहीं करती है। इकोनॉमिक्स से सोशियोलॉजी में मैं ट्रेन एज एमए इन इकोनॉमिक्स, एमफिल इन इकोनॉमिक्स, लेकिन थोड़ा सा शिफ्ट करके कि सोशियोलॉजी को देखते हुए आए। तो फर्स्ट वो बोले कि जाओ पहले मैत्री चौधरी को पढ़ो, देन यू केम टू नो कि तुम अपनी चीजों को फ्रेम करोगी। तो उस समय पे पढ़ा, लेकिन सुना इतना था। तो आज बहुत अच्छा लगा आपको सुन के, तो थैंक यू सो मच। एक चीज मैं मेरी क्वेरी है, मैं समझ एक कि आपका व्यू क्या है इस बारे में। जैसे हम बात करें कि रोल ऑफ स्टेट एज वेल एज मार्केट ऑल्सो प्लेज अ इम्पोर्टेंट रोल, कि कौन सा सब्जेक्ट आज महत्वपूर्ण हो गया है, किसकी महत्ता बढ़ गई है। जैसे कह रहे कि इकोनॉमिक्स इज द चीयर लीडर्स इन द अमंग द सोशल साइंस। तो इकोनॉमिक्स का जो है जितना स्टेट रोल प्ले करता है, जैसे आज की तारीख में हम बोलते हैं कि ये हिस्ट्री का ये पार्ट पढ़ना है, ये नहीं पढ़ना है, ये हिस्ट्री थी या ये लिखी गई थी या लिखवाई गई थी। ऐसे कि मार्केट जो है वो इकोनॉमिक्स को ज्यादा लेके आया है, सोशियोलॉजी को तो स्टेट वर्सेस मार्केट दे ऑल्सो प्ले एन इम्पोर्टेंट रोल, कि किस पे किस तरह से एम्फेसिस करना है और किस वे में पढ़ना है। इवन अगर हम आज के दौर में अपने पब्लिकेशंस भी देखे हैं, अर्लियर इट वाज नॉट सो इम्पोर्टेंट कि कितना साइटेशंस है, किस जर्नल्स में है, लेकिन अगर आज आप रुटलेज और एल्सवियर से पब्लिश ही नहीं करते हैं तो आपका वैल्यू ही नहीं है, अनटिल और अनलेस जो है कि आपने उसमें क्या लिखा है बिना उसके पढ़े। जनरल किस में छपा है दैट इज मोर इम्पोर्टेंट, उसमें लिखा क्या है उससे ज्यादा। तो ये मार्केट ही है, और नंबर्स ऑफ जर्नल्स हैं जो पेड हैं। मैं नहीं लिख रही हूँ, समटाइम्स वो जो मैंने एक थॉट दिया है वो उसको पूरा मॉडिफाई करके एक पब्लिश फॉर्म में ले आते हैं, आई हैव पेड फॉर देम। तो मार्केट ऑल्सो प्ले एन इम्पोर्टेंट रोल। तो आप इसको किस तरीके से देखती हैं?
जी जी, जब कुछ साल क्या, 90s में जब वी हैड अ ग्लोबलाइजेशन और न्यू इकोनॉमिक रिफॉर्म्स, तो एक देयर वाज अ जनरल कॉमन सेंस इन सोशियोलॉजी, सोशल साइंसेस की स्टेट अभी रिट्रीट किया और मार्केट आगे आया, retreat of the state and the coming in of the market. I have a slight difference in this formulation कि state और market वो अलग अलग चीज नहीं है, कि ये स्टेट है, ए बिल्डिंग ए स्टेट है और बिल्डिंग बी मार्केट है। स्टेट और मार्केट और सोसाइटी का बीच में एक कनेक्शन है, सोशल रिलेशंस विद इन विच वी आर लोकेटेड, क्लास हो, कास्ट हो, प्रोडक्शन रिलेशंस हो, जैसे समाज में है वैसे ही स्टेट के अंदर भी है और मार्केट में भी है। और मार्केट और स्टेट के साथ ऑलवेज एक क्लोज रिलेशनशिप था, ऐसा नहीं है कि वो बिल्कुल ही अलग अलग चीज है। अभी शायद अलग बात है कि यू कैन हैव बी अ मिनिस्टर ऑफ एविएशन एंड ऑल्सो रन एविएशन, एक जमाना में ये भी हुआ था। वो बहुत दिखता है कि देखिए एक ही सेम सेट ऑफ पीपल आर इन द स्टेट एंड इन द मार्केट। बट एब्स्ट्रैक्ट लेवल पे, थ्योरेटिकल लेवल पे अगर हम ये देखें तो वी वुड लाइक टू गो बैक टू हमारे जो सोशल साइंस थिंकर, जब हमने वेब ऑफ सोशल रिलेशनशिप के टर्म यूज करते हैं, तो ये जो वेब ऑफ सोशल पॉलिटिकल रिलेशन हो, इकोनॉमिक हो, प्रोडक्शन हो, प्रॉपर्टी रिलेशंस है, उसके बीच वी आर ऑल्सो इम्प्लीकेटेड एज इंडिविजुअल्स, but so is the state in the market. और historical juncture पे depend करता what comes more forward, whether it's the state or the market. So आप economics के है, वो Keynesian project का बात है कि which time the state thought they should regulate the market more, and with the rise of neoliberalism जब उनको लगा कि no, the market has to take over the ascendancy, but वो decision भी तो state ही लेते हैं. 91 में जब इकोनॉमिक रिफॉर्म्स वो तो स्टेट ही लिया था. सो इट इज द रिलेशनशिप बिटवीन द डायनामिक्स ऑफ द मार्केट एंड द स्टेट, वो इंपॉर्टेंट है. और अगर हम इनको बिल्कुल ही दो डिस्क्रीट एंटिटीज का तरह लेते हैं, देन देयर विल बी अ प्रॉब्लम. और हिस्टोरिकल जंक्चर्स में कब सोशल वेलफेयर इज सीन एज समथिंग प्रोडक्टिव, और कब लगता है ये देखो टैक्स पेयर्स मनी को तो यूज कर रहे हैं. आई हैव नाउ रिटायर्ड, तो आई डोंट लिव इन द कैंपस नाउ, आई एम इन द जैसे डीडीए फ्लैट्स है दिल्ली में, तो यहाँ पे आरडब्ल्यूए का व्हाट्सएप ग्रुप है. आप लोगों को पता हर जगह में आरडब्ल्यूए होते हैं, व्हाट्सएप ग्रुप है, और वो थोड़ी बहुत मैग्नीफाइंग पावर्स जो होते हैं उनको मैग्नीफाई एम्पलीफाई. तो उनको लोग, उनके मेन प्रॉब्लम इज टॉकिंग अबाउट व्हाट किरण हैड मेंशन कि मेड्स जो है वो क्यों पार्क का बेंच में बैठे हैं. उनका देयर इज ऑलवेज दिस very subtle ways, not even very subtle, by which they are trying to say कि this is the normative. पार्क जो है वो टैक्स पेयर्स मनी का है, और ये हम लोग मिडिल क्लास है, हम टैक्स पे करते हैं, हम पार्क में बैठेंगे, हम वॉक करेंगे, वहां पे पानी क्यों पी रहे माली. I'm not making it up. I'm horrified. रोज ये सब व्हाट्सएप डिस्कशन में होता है. ये न्यू नॉर्मेटिव कंसेंसस है कि सोशल वेलफेयर इज वेस्ट ऑफ मनी. तो जब लोग पीपल विल से कि दैट दे आर सो सेल्फिश, उन्होंने गरीब लोगों को सेल्फिश बोलेंगे, और खुद अपने आप को दे विल से देखो लाइक आई वुड ऑलवेज से दैट आई वुड आल्सो लाइक कि डीए बढ़ जाए, मेरा पेंशन बढ़ जाए. दैट इज द लॉजिक ऑफ इंडिविजुअल. सो व्हेन आई लुक एट माई सेल्फ लाइक दैट, आई शुड ऑल्सो बी एबल टू. बट वो नॉर्मेटिव शिफ्ट हुआ, हमारे देश में भी हुआ और ग्लोबली में भी हुआ. उनको लगता है ये वेस्ट है, which also means a certain kind, बहुत पहले जमाने में there was this brilliant journalist, Professor Arvind, what was his second name? अजित आपको याद है, होंगे, बिहार के थे. He talked about as an apartheid, जो हमारे देश में भाग दास, अरविंद दास, that we are already separated, segregated हो गया हम. जैसे नेशनल मूवमेंट में कोशिश था कि सबको जोड़ के आगे बढ़ो, अब क्या हुआ कि हम बिल्कुल सेग्रीगेटेड हो गया. तो सोशियोलॉजी का भी यहाँ पे रोल है, क्वेश्चन ऑफ एम्पैथी. एम्पैथी को भी लोग दे सी इट एज अ वेस्ट. हर चीज का तो इंस्ट्रूमेंटल वैल्यू हो गया, सो दीज आर कनेक्टेड. बट द स्टेट मार्केट का सवाल आपने पूछा, आई थिंक इट्स इम्पोर्टेंट टू सी इट मोर थ्योरेटिकली कि ये अलग अलग एम्पिरिकल एंटिटीज नहीं है, but there is a relationship between the two.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Well, Maitriji, I think Shivshika raised the question of special.
So there is one more question from the online. I think Professor Sanghmitra Acharya handled.
Let me finish and then she can come in. You want to her to raise a question first, if she is in a hurry?
Sanghmitra ma'am.
May I?
Yes.
Okay, you go ahead, then I.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, GIDS, for giving me this opportunity to listen to Professor Chaudhary after a long time. And as usual, you've been wonderful, very enchanting, very enlightening.
She was our previous speaker, so she has the priority.
It was really interesting to note when you went reflective by saying that when you had to make a choice of a subject to study versus your brother. I was just wondering, when we are looking at the convergence of research methodologies from the quantitative approach to the qualitative approach, I'm sure the reflexivity probably takes a backseat when we are coming from the quantitative approach. But as we've moved ahead in research and we see that there are, mixed
methodologies which have evolved. I was just wondering, when we really have to approach this question of gender intersecting with the other elements, how much of this introspection, which we methodologically probably would prefer to use the word reflexivity, come into play. In fact, you ended up the last conversation that you made vis-a-vis the response to the last query. I thought it probably becomes interesting to bring on board the variations in this kind of connect that we are drawing between the quantitative and the qualitative approaches by way of certain questions, which you've already kind of alluded to. So I just wanted to bring in that. But it's been really wonderful, and congratulations for your heading the association also. So thanks so much. Lovely listening to you.
Thank you.
Just
I think
this.
I'll club my question and then you can you can answer both together. So I was speaking of sociology question which Shilshika raised, isolation of sociology, political science, and then Kavita brought in state versus the market, and the gender is the fourth aspect into it. I think the problem we are facing in India is we see these branches as a separate subject altogether. The real problem, the real way of doing things is what West is just making interdisciplinary research in most of the approaches. It is we are still not able to club the social sciences together, whereas there is a now we know trans disciplines are also coming together. Physics, chemistry is joining with the sociology, and what is important from the society's point of view is resolving their problems. So unless we bring in the different approaches together, I think the real solution will not come. I give you 2-3 examples. I was working on something stubble waste burning, where a happy seeder machine has been developed which takes care of the stubble and also need not burn. The happy seeder will just cut the stubble and simultaneously does the seeding, and there is no need of burning. So this machine was developed by Australia. I was working with the ACIR project, Australian Council International Research, Agriculture Research Project, where the machine, Indian version was also developed by Punjab Agriculture University with the local scientists. But the actual problem of adoption is hanging there. The machine is available, people but farmers are not adopting. Then it was found that there is a need to just look at the behavior of the farmers. So we need the sociological studies to find out how we can facilitate the adoption. There was another example where we had one experiment study in Punjab on alcohol, where we carried a experiment for 3 months on a daily basis. We provided, we were studying the consumption of liquor vis-a-vis the food security and health issues by just making a daily budget of the households on the consumption of food, liquor, and consumption of other commodities. We provided 50 rupees per household subsidy, a kind of cash transfer in the form of 3 tokens, 50 rupees, 20, 20 plus 10, and ask the household to spend on food, or they can spend on buying books or whatever for their children, or buying medicine, and vis-a-vis buying the liquor. And then we will monitor where they are spending. And we had before giving the transfer and after giving the transfer for 3 months. And then we were analyzing the data. We also had a team of psychologists of 5 persons who will go and just half of the sample who they were just giving a treatment to the alcoholists. What are the harms of alcohol and how they can overcome their anxiety and how they can just stop drinking. So end of the day, when we analyze the data, we found that the economic aid we are giving, that has not raised alcohol much, but the psychological treatment we have given, that has worked wonder. Many of them, their consumption has come down. So basically, when this social science and in some stages the physical sciences also come together, probably that brings the solution to the human problem, which probably in our country, unless we bring these disciplines together, probably we are not doing justice to the society and we are not able to come out with the solution. I think this is the point I wanted to highlight, that in any case, economics and sociologists, they are all dealing with human behavior. And unless we try to understand from both the aspects, and I think there is a problem from our social scientists also. We think that there is a tool of econometrics. Our economists have adopted very well. They are learning econometrics, bringing in quantitative techniques, high mathematics also. With facing difficulties, they have evolved. Even within India, we have very good econometrician, and mostly economic side they have adopted. In the West, they are studying these techniques, quantitative techniques, and they are applying. But in India, we said, no, I find hardly they are aware about regression, which has become very normal. I was in IEG. One of my friends' sister was in medical in AIMS, and for her research, we applied these regression techniques to tell what is the quantitative impact, because they have not studied it. So the same problem they are facing. If we have the quantitative techniques also in other social science disciplines, there is no harm. You don't need to get into too much of quantitative. But end of the day, I was studying microeconomics. It takes 2 pages, 4 pages. It takes a lot of time to understand the rigidity of quantification. But the moment I read mathematical economics, it gives me the slope. Slope is 0.5. You can easily understand what you want to convey. So I think that is where the importance of statistics comes in, and that needs to be understood. And I think it needs to be included in the curricula. Only then our sociology, political science, all these disciplines will be able to play a much better role than what we have today. Thank you very much. It's not a question, a kind of my comment.
No, I understand completely. Yes.
I want to ask one more question. I'm Neetu Batra. Ma'am, it's always privileged to listen you offline or whether online. And my query is that sociology has always ongoing debate about the methodologies and theories we apply. There is one group or camp which advocates that you apply West in theories emerged from the West, like functionalism, Marxism, Weber, and these phenomenology or that. And another group which advocates that you apply theories which we indigenous, like what is your perspective on this? As or now we are talking about decolonized methodologies. So what is your idea or perspective on?
Yeah, I actually sort of did try and touch upon it in my presentations.
Yes,
yeah. So in my understanding, I actually have a edited book, बहुत पुराना है. It's about 20 years old, edited Feminism in India करके. तो when I was doing the book, तो कई लोग को कहना था कि फेमिनिज्म तो हमारे देश में था भी नहीं और इस पे कोई डिबेट भी नहीं था. जैसे बाहर में they had many debate, Marxism, feminist, socialist, feminist वगैरह. Now my argument was a little different. The argument was कि जो हमारे हिस्ट्री था एंटी कॉलोनियल मूवमेंट और जैसे जेंडर क्वेश्चन इंडिया में इमर्ज किया, इट हैड अ वेरी डिस्टिंक्टिव ट्रैजेक्टरी, और उनका जो सारे डिबेट्स आई वुड रीड इट एज कॉन्सेप्चुअल डिबेट्स। पर अगर हमें कोई बोले कि हमारे जो कैटेगरीज है वो बिल्कुल अलग है और विदेशों में जो कैटेगरीज है वो बिल्कुल अलग है, आई वुड हैव अ प्रॉब्लम। I would have a problem क्योंकि there are many categories. अगर आप philosophical level पे भी चले जाए, there'll be philosophically categories which are commonality. जैसे Kiran talked about linguistic turn. So even in the Indian philosophical tradition, there's a lot of debates on linguistics, which was a very rich kind of. But अगर ये कहना है कि हमारे जो tradition था उसके साथ कोई ताल्लुक ही नहीं था और कोई traditions का, वो गलत है, because knowledge systems kept traveling. It's like our food. Like some food came from Southeast Asia, kahin pe aur kahin se aaye. The knowledge system bhi वैसे ही, it has floated, moved around. So this divide, और ये जो decolonial word है, I find it very interesting, क्योंकि sociology का debate जो है, वो पूरा इस पे था. अभी recently we lost Professor Jeet Singh Oberoi. उनका एक लेख है early 1960s को, Swaraj in Indian Sociology. और पूरा ये डिबेट्स था कि हम इंडियन सोशियोलॉजिकल कैटेगरीज कैसे यूज हुआ, पर उनका इसका मतलब नहीं था कि वो लेवी स्ट्रॉस नहीं पढ़े. He was also a structuralist, but he was also familiar with indigenous categories. और उनको सिखिज्म पे भी जो काम है, he used the categories within the religion. So my position is for social sciences to develop democracy इसलिए जरूरी है कि freedom of thought and expression, कि ये भी आप पढ़ लीजिए, वो भी आप पढ़ लीजिए, कंपेयर कीजिए, बट कोई भी फिक्स स्लॉट्स में नहीं लीजिए. अदर थिंग इज आई एम वेरी अनकंफर्टेबल विद कॉम्पिटिटिव नॉलेज सिस्टम. देखिए हमारे ये बेहतर है, आई एम अ बंगाली बाय बर्थ, तो बचपन में ये बहुत उस जमाने में डिस्कशन होता, टैगोर ज्यादा बड़े हैं कि शेक्सपियर ज्यादा बड़े. आई फाइंड दिस काइंड ऑफ डिबेट क्वाइट रिडिकुलस. आप शेक्सपियर भी पढ़ लीजिए, बहुत इट्स वंडरफुल, टैगोर भी पढ़ लीजिए, इट इज वंडरफुल. इसमें कंपटीशन का क्या है? सो अगर मुझे वेबर पढ़ के कुछ सीख सकता, बहुत बढ़िया. और अगर मुझे कोई 16th सेंचुरी मेडिवल सूफीज फेमिनिस्ट आइडियाज, बहुत उस पर चर्चा हुआ, या भक्ति मूवमेंट पढ़ लीजिए, वहां पे भी बहुत लिबरेटिंग आइडियाज है, वो भी पढ़ लीजिए. इसमें क्या बात है? ये कंपटीशन कहाँ से आ गया? एंड कंपटीशन इज वेरी कैपिटलिस्टिक, यू सी. अभी इकोनॉमिस्ट यहाँ पे बैठे हुए हैं, इट्स अ मार्केट सिस्टम. इसके आगे इसमें एक बहुत बढ़िया कहानी है. तो आई यूज्ड टू टीच इन अ कॉलेज, तो वहाँ पे कुछ फंक्शन में कोई मिशनरी टीचर, वो कैथलिक इंस्टीट्यूशन था, सो शी टोल्ड अ स्टोरी कि एक मिशनरी कोई अफ्रीकन सोसाइटी में गया और उनको कहा कि थोड़ा सा मतलब फ्रेंडशिप कर ले लोगों के साथ, जो आइस ब्रेकिंग होता, कि बच्चे उनको मान लेंगे. तो शी गेव अ स्टोरी, शी सेड देखो बच्चों, आई हैव गॉट सम चॉकलेट्स फॉर यू, आप 2 लाइन में खड़े हो जाओ और रेस करो, और जो जीतेंगे उसको चॉकलेट. फिर बच्चे बिल्कुल खुश नहीं रहा, रो पड़े. सो शी सेड व्हाई आर यू क्राइंग, हमें तो चॉकलेट देना है. ही सेड बट ये तो बहुत क्रूअल गेम है, आप चॉकलेट बांट दो, हम सबको दे दो, हमें रेस करके चॉकलेट लेने का क्या है? सो वेरी ऑफन जो नॉर्मेटिव है और उसको हम एम्पिरिकली एक्सेप्ट करते हैं, वो हम सोचते हैं. तो जब हम बोलते हैं देखिए हमारे लैंग्वेज बेटर है, हमारे रिलीजन बेटर है, हमारे कम्युनिटी बेटर है, इट्स टेरिबली कॉम्पिटिटिव. वो तो बिल्कुल वेस्टर्न है अगर हमें वेस्ट को क्रिटिक करना है, एंड आई थिंक वी देयरफॉर हैव टू प्रॉब्लमेटाइज दिस.
Madam, market I find with an example, because again and again market references coming. There's a footwear company which launches new footwear, and the company sends 2 executives to Africa for looking out the scope. So end of say a quarter, the 2 of them they write back. One says, this country people are illiterate, uncultured, barefoot they walk, they don't wear foot at all. You stop the consignment, there is no scope, and we don't need explore any possibilities. The second fellow says, here people are all barefoot, there's ह्यूज पॉपुलेशन, बहुत बड़ा स्कोप है, to send multiple consignments. A lot has to be done. This is market, how you take it. Market will, one side you say there is no scope at all, the other side sees it as a big scope. So this is where India is standing, I think, at present. Yeah.
Sir, I have a question, madam. See, if somebody critically writes on something specific issue, then generally people say that is negative. He is negative about that particular issue. In that case, how to sensitize society towards that? I mean,
as you get older, कुछ फेवरेट टॉपिक्स हो जाता, तो आजकल ये मेरा फेवरेट टॉपिक बन गया, तो मैंने कई बार एग्जांपल देता, जैसे कॉमन सेंस नॉलेज है और क्रिटिकल नॉलेज का जो फर्क है. तो जैसे व्हेन वी डू जेंडर, तो अगर my mothers, I mean, now I'm too old, but supposing looking back 50, 60 years ago, if my mother said कि girls should not go out, रात को मत जाओ, कॉमन सेंस है, वो गलत तो नहीं है ना, वो गलत नहीं है, क्योंकि उनको हिसाब से इफ यू गो आउट देयर इज डेंजर. वो कॉमन सेंस नॉलेज इज ऑलवेज प्रैक्टिकल नॉलेज. प्रैक्टिकल मतलब अपने विद इन द कंस्ट्रेंट आप अपना संभाल लो. और लाइक आई केम टू JNU ओनली बिकॉज माई ब्रदर वाज हियर, शायद नहीं भेजते थे. कॉमन सेंस इज प्रैक्टिकल बट कॉन्टेक्स्ट स्पेसिफिक. अगर हमें सोशल साइंस नॉलेज जेंडर पर्सपेक्टिव से करना है, वही एग्जाम्पल अलग तरीके से पूछेंगे. आपको एक बहुत बढ़िया लेख है रोकिया हुसैन का, यू मे नो इट, सुल्तानाज ड्रीम. वो 12 पेज का है, नेट में मिल जाते हैं. तो उसमें एक लैंड है, ड्रीम लैंड है, एंड द लेडी फॉल्स अस्लीप वहां पे, एंड सिस्टर सेरा करके प्रोटैगनिस्ट है, वो उसको घुमाने ले जाते, ऑल इन द ड्रीम. और ड्रीम में देखते सिर्फ लड़कियां ही हैं, नो मैन. Girls are working on the field, girls are working everywhere. तो she asked कि आप लोग का देश में लड़के नहीं हैं, where are the men? So your sister Sarah says the men are in पर्दा. ठीक है, बोले men are in पर्दा, is that not very cruel? तो बोला क्रूएल, देखिए अगर आपका जंगल से कोई खतरनाक शेर आ गया और सबको अटैक करते, आप शेर को पिंजरे में डालेंगे कि लोगों को? Now, this is critical analysis as against common sense. Okay. And this was written in 1905 by a lady who was Parda Nashin herself, and started reading and writing, Rokia Hussain. तो उसपे आपका ये नेगेटिव है कि पॉजिटिव? उनको कहना था कि जब तक सेम थिंग इज, टैगोर का एक बहुत बढ़िया लेख है कि वो रे का फिल्म भी बना है, घोड़े बायरे, इनसाइड आउटसाइड, जो होम वाला. तो उसपे दिस यंग मैन, जैसे उस जमाने में बहुत यंग एजुकेटेड हस्बैंड्स वुड टीच देयर वाइफ्स कि शादी के बाद की पढ़ लो, यू हैव टू बी इंडिपेंडेंट. तो अदर वुमेन इन दैट हाउस वुड ऑलवेज लाफ एट हर. देखो शादीशुदा है, योर हस्बैंड इज नॉट इवन इंटरेस्टेड इन यू, वो पढ़ाने बैठ जाते हैं. ठीक है. सो शी वाज वेरी सैड एंड शी टोल्ड हर हस्बैंड, देखिए विमेन हैव वेरी नैरो एंड crooked minds, टेढ़ा और नैरो माइंड्स. तो उनका फिर हस्बैंड ने कहा, which is obviously Tagore speaking, कि चाइनीज women का फीट बांधा जाते थे एक जमाने में, you must have heard, और उनके फीट भी बहुत नैरो और crooked था. This is sociology, मतलब structure defines how you are. Sociology tells you, तो अगर आपका खुले घूमेंगे तो you will be free. और अगर आपने, एक और भी बहुत सुंदर लेख है, वो शायद इनिशियली हिंदी में लिखा गया था, कृष्ण कुमार का, जो पहले एजुकेशनिस्ट. उनको कहना था मध्य प्रदेश में when he was a young boy studying in school, तो स्कूल से जब बच्चे निकलते थे बॉयज स्कूल से, बॉयज would climb onto the cycle, खूब तेज भागते थे, कभी एक चक्का पे खड़े हो जाते थे, इधर जाते थे उधर जाते थे, बिल्कुल फ्री. और बोलते women जब उनको बहुत मजे आते थे, the girls would come out of their school and they would be huddled, एक सेमी सर्कल में वो लोग फुस करते करते स्कूल से सीधा घर पहुंच जाते थे. ये जो सोशल बिहेवियर है, ये सोशली स्ट्रक्चर्ड है. ये तो कॉमन सेंस कहेंगे, देखिए विमेन गॉसिपी है, कितने टेढ़े दिमाग है, जैसे हमारे स्टार प्लस वाले सीरियल में दिखाते हैं वगैरह। हाँ, बट द इशू इज द स्ट्रक्चर. अगर आपका रसोई इज योर प्ले पॉइंट, अगर रसोई पे आपको कुरुक्षेत्र वॉर करनी है तो आपको नमक तो डालना ही पड़ेगा किसी को, अगर आपका पूरा दुनिया इज योर फील्ड, इट विल बी वेरी डिफरेंट. सो आई थिंक जो क्रिटिक है, क्रिटिक को उनको लगता है ये नेगेटिव है. क्रिटिक नेगेटिव नहीं है. क्रिटिक समाज का जो अरेंजमेंट है, इंटरनल स्ट्रक्चर है, उसको पूरा खोल के दिखाने का क्षमता है, और वो थ्योरेटिकली समझना है कि हमारे स्ट्रक्चर क्या है सोसाइटी का. सो दैट इज क्रिटिक. क्रिटिक का मतलब नहीं है कि आप किसी का अगेंस्ट कंप्लेन करना. दैट इज नॉट द आइडिया एट ऑल.
Thank you, man. Thank you so much.
Very much. Any other questions? Any more questions? No. Thank you. Can I speak now?
Yeah, please. Still, floor is yours, sir, in your hands.
I don't know. Let me confirm first of all whether I'm audible to people. Am I audible to?
Now you're audible. Now you're audible. जी. Mic has to be near you. हाँ जी.
सर आप बीच में बैठा करिए सर, उधर ना बैठा करिए.
जी जी. That is right.
को अपने हाथ में होल्ड करके हम बोल रहे हैं.
Audible. Direction थोड़ा इधर.
Period of time I'd like to draw upon the ideas and that come from the lecture of my friend Professor Matthew Chaudhary. Many of the participants, even the discussants. इसमें जो भी मैं मेरे दिमाग में जो बात आई है, I'd like to share with you. Matthew speaks of, if I'm right, if I'm not mistaken, if we want to rechant and empower social science and sociology for that matter, and if we want to recover social science from its current role as loser, if I may say so, in the science wars, I'm talking about the natural science wars, then we need to think of the three things. And this I have drawn upon I have drawn from your lectures that you could manage to speak out within a span of 45 minutes. Number one, we must drop the fruitless efforts to emulate natural scientists' success in producing cumulative and predictive theory. This is what most of the natural scientists are doing. This approach simply does not work in social science. I don't know how far I could manage to conceive your communications. Number two, this is a point I have noted. You must take up the problems that matter to local, national, global or international, whatever, communities in which we live today. We must do it in ways that matter. Social sciences must matter. That's very important, significant. We must focus on issues of values, normative ideas, and power, like great social scientists have advocated, right from Aristotle, Machiavelli, and even to Max Weber. Deliberately, I have not quoted Karl Marx and other thinkers. And even Bourdieu. Finally, we must effectively communicate. This is the third idea, third point that I could manage to draw from your communications or from the communications of the different participants. We must effectively communicate the results of our research to fellow citizens of the country. These are three ideas, and if we do this, we may successfully transform social sciences and sociology. Sociology, exactly in a fashion Professor C. Wright Mills long back communicated to all of us through his sociological imaginations. That imaginations we develop on the basis of our experience, in myriad forms of experience, in myriad situations that we have been surviving day in, day out. And that becomes crystallized in terms of perspective. It is so powerful that if we transfer to the common masses, the common masses can fight out the mystification created by bureaucrats, politicians in the modern world. And those elite who are the great exploiters, those who are responsible for creating exclusion in the systems. This is what sociology, this is one of the powerful and significant roles of sociologists in the modern world. So if you take into cognizance the 3 points as Professor Matthew Chaudhary has communicated to us today through our lectures, I'm sure of sociology will be much more meaningful. And this is what sociology matters. This is what social science matters. Now let me speak my points, and this is on the basis of one of the great social scientists of our country, much ignored, Professor A.K. Sharan. Professor A.K. Sharan's contributions, I'm sure of Indian sociologists, Indian social scientists may not be aware of, but all of the entire world, entire academia, Western and American part of the world, are the great admirer of Professor A.K. Sharan's contributions. So I salvage some of his significant points and like to submit before you. If you permit me, this will take 3-4 minutes. He says that the development of social science appears to be constantly affected by conjunctures, where we attempt to clarify ourselves and to others what we can and what we cannot do with the kinds of natural science or science today we do have. This is a statement by A.K. Sharan. And he says that, I'm telling you by way of concluding his own ideas, let me speak of, I'd like to develop 2 scenarios for clarifications. This is basing on his own arguments, the number 1 point. And I'm sure of that it's connected with the topic that you are speaking today, social science, sociology, and democracy. The first, a perpetuation of science as usual. I'm talking of science in natural science form. And second, as an emergent phronetic. I use the terminology phronetic. This is the terminology being used by Sharan in September. He says the phronetic social science. Science should be altruistic. Sociology should be altruistic. Unless it is altruistic, it cannot be called as a human science. In the first scenario, A.K. Sharan speaks of scientism here understood as a tendency to believe that science holds a reliable method of reaching the truth about the nature of things, continues to dominate thinking in social and political science. Actually, he was totally opposed to the fact that knowledge being produced by meta-theoretical discussions. Given the fact postmodernists also take this stand. But postmodernist stand has certain kinds of limitations. This moment in time, I cannot deliberate on this because I couldn't be able to. कि मैं जो बता रहा हूँ सब A.K. शरण साहब की बातें A.K. शरण साहब के ओरिजिनल कॉन्ट्रीब्यूशंस मेरे ही पास है पूरे संसार में टुडे और किसी के पास नहीं है. I'm privileged to have all his contributions at मेरे ही पास है at my place. Now, epistemic science and predictive theory are regarded as the pinnacle of scientific endeavor in this scenario. The first scenario में ये है जो पूरा उन्होंने अपोज कर दिया है. उन्होंने second scenario की बात करी और second scenario पर I like to focus on. That second scenario replaces the view that social sciences can be practical as epistemic with their role, with their role as phronesis. In this scenario, the purpose of the social science is not to develop theory, but to contribute to society's practical rationality in elucidating where we are, where we want to go, and what is desirable according to diverse sets of values and interests. This is what social science means, be it sociology or critical science or economics or psychology, whatever. The goal of the phronetic approach becomes one of the contributing to society's capacity for value, rational deliberation and action. So the contribution may be a combination of concrete empirical analysis and practical philosophical considerations. And this is what he quoted here, Bourdieu's famous phrase that field work in philosophy. Even philosophy, we go for the field work. And for that, you have to see that you approach. This is what he was great admirer of Weber's, the ideal types methodology, where how can you approach nearer to the reality? This is by imputing the experience of actions per actor to the actor himself. Unless you adopt this kind of process, it's difficult for you to know about oriented structures of the reality that you are searching for as a sociologist or as a social scientist. It's what this Professor A.K. Sarni speaks of. So today, the dominant is strict, unfortunately, in social science or sociology. Our director speaks of econometrics, statistics, a lot of research techniques he has mentioned at the moment. This dominant streak in social science continues to evolve along the lines of the first scenario. This is what the basing on the natural sciences, theoretical constructions, and methodological approach. And that is we call as scientism. I personally go along with Professor. I'm totally opposed to that because that never allows you, or perhaps helps you out, come nearer to the reality. But the scientism in social science, because of the reason that Professor A.K. Sarni speaks of, we talk of scientism in social science, which is self-defeating. And this is self-defeating because the reality of social science so evidently does not live up to the ideals of scientism or the scientist ideas and thought and natural science reality. Therefore, it is the second scenario what Professor A.K. Sarni has been speaking about, that pronounces ideas and the framework which is more fertile and worth working for. So I go along broadly with Professor A.K. Sarni and also subscribe. I'm sure of Professor Maitri Chaudhary's most of the communications to the ideas happy to be pregnant with A.K. Sarni's perspectives. So I hold you in very high esteem. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Now I invite Professor Trivedi to give a vote of thanks, formal vote of thanks to.
First of all, I thank Maitri ma'am for accepting our invitation to speak. I know when first time when I called her, she was traveling in Punjab because as a president of our society, she has to travel all over India and deliver lectures, and she's also busy delivering online lectures as well. But still, she could take out time for us and speak on such an important. Even economists are, in a kind of a state of thinking about sociology and society as a whole. So actually, you have provoked us all about thinking about the disciplines and discipline boundaries. So thank you, ma'am, for accepting our invitation. I also thank Professor Kiranmai for accepting our invitation to be the discussant of today's lecture. And I must thank Professor A.K. Pandey, my teacher, my supervisor. All of you know that he's my research supervisor as well. So I'm thankful to him that he could come and preside over this lecture. And first and lastly, I thank all the participants, both offline, sitting in this room, elsewhere, and also those who participated in online. Thank you all for participating in this lecture. We should continue this discussion further, and that was the objective of this lecture. Thank you, ma'am. Once again, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.